Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Robbins, and this week we're going to talk about 4 things that the Bible teaches us about how we can overcome anxiety, stress, and depression. If you haven't done so already, please take a second right now and go click that subscribe button. And then while you're down there, click that little bell next to it so you get notifications each week when we put out a new video. Each week we are putting out videos to help you grow in your faith and to give you ideas for how you can help your church to grow. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that when it comes to anxiety and stress and depression, I am not a professional, and I'm not trying to go outside of my expertise today. If you struggle with these things, if you struggle with depression, there are professionals out there, and I really want to encourage you to get the help that you need. But what we're going to do today is take a look at Scripture and some of the teachings that Scripture gives us about how we can overcome these things and just some of the hope that it gives us in the midst of these difficult times. The first important thing for you to know that the Bible teaches us about stress, anxiety, and depression is that you are not alone. 18% of Americans suffer with anxiety. And between the ages of 13 and 18, that number increases to 25%. Throughout our country, rates of suicide, anxiety, and depression are on the rise. And 40% of people say that they feel more anxious today than they did a year ago. So if you struggle with any of these conditions, I want you to know that you are not alone. And what I want you to see today is that even people in the Bible struggled with this. The greats, the great prophets, the great teachers, the people that we look up to, struggled with the same things that you're going through, or that the people you love are going through. So what we're going to look at today is a passage where a prophet named Elijah, one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament, goes through some severe anxiety and depression to the point where he wants to end his life. And what we're going to see is how God gets him through that and how God can help get you through that as well. In the book of 1 Kings, it says, "Now Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, 'May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them.'" So what it's saying here is that when Jezebel finds out that Elijah has killed all of her prophets, she says, "Elijah, I'm done with you. Your time is over. You are dead. You are gone. Bye for Elijah, because your time is over." And it goes on to say Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. He said, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." So when Elijah finds out that Jezebel's after him, he flees for his life. But here's the irony in all of that. While he's fleeing for his life, he lays down and begs God to take his life. And the question is, why? What in the world is going on? Why would he run for his life just to ask God to take his life? Well, let's keep reading. "Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, 'Get up and eat.' He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, 'Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you.' So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night." All right, so what's going on in this passage? What does it have to teach us about overcoming anxiety, stress, and depression in our lives? And what is the reason that Elijah runs for his life just to beg for his life? Well, much of it begins in the passage where Elijah says, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." You see, what Elijah is saying is he looks at himself as a prophet and he feels like a failure. He looks at his ancestors and they failed. He looks at what he's done here trying to overcome Jezebel and he's failing. The people have turned away from God. Everything he's doing is a failure. And he just feels like his life is no longer worth living. And so even though he's running for his life, he feels like there's no reason to keep on trying to live. And so he just begs God to take it. And maybe you've had a moment like that. Maybe you felt just so overwhelmed, like your life couldn't get any better. Maybe you felt like everything you do just ends up in failure. Everything seems to come crashing down. You're in financial failure. You're in relationship failure. You're in school failure. Everything you do just doesn't seem to work out, and sometimes you just feel like it's not worth going on. Well, here's where we learn the first lesson about how to overcome those feelings. And it's something really special that God does. God teaches us that in these moments, we just need to embrace the pain and embrace God. One of the strangest and yet one of the most loving things that God does is he lets Elijah rest in that pain. He lets him feel it. And I know this feels weird, right? God lets him rest in this pain. Why doesn't God just take it away? But if you've been in those moments of pain sometimes, if you've been in those moments where everything just feels like it's falling apart, sometimes you just want somebody to appreciate the pain. You know, so often people look at us when we're in pain and they say, hey, just feel better, it'll all get better, perk up, act like everything's okay. But sometimes you just want to feel the pain. Sometimes you just want to rest in that pain, and God lets him do that. Right? God lets him embrace the pain, but then God also challenges him to embrace God in that moment, to not get lost in the pain, not get lost in the darkness, but to find God and hold on to God in the midst of that. What God's teaching us here is that it's okay to be in pain. You don't have to feel guilty for being in pain. Embrace that pain sometimes. That's a healthy thing to do. But in the midst of that, also try to hold on and embrace God and know that you aren't alone, that God is right there with you. The next lesson that God teaches Elijah is that once you've embraced that pain, sometimes the next best thing you need to do is just get moving. Think back to that moment where Elijah is laying under the bush, begging for God to take his life. And it says this angel touches him and just says, get up and eat. Now, when you think about it, that phrase, get up, it doesn't sound very compassionate. It doesn't sound very kind. It doesn't feel like what Elijah needs to hear in that moment. And yet the angel is saying, hey, the best thing you need to do right now is get up, get moving, start going. See, the problem is that sometimes when we find ourselves in these dark places, one of the hardest things to do is to get moving. We get lost in that darkness. We get stuck just sitting still. And one of the best things that we can do is just force ourselves to get up. And let's be honest, it's not easy. Right? Sometimes it's a hard thing to get moving. I think about it like when you're on an exercise bike or a rowing machine. Those first few pulls, those first few pedals, they're hard. Right? There's a lot of resistance. It's not easy to get things going, but once you get moving, once those things get going, it gets easier and easier. And that's what God's trying to teach Elijah. It'd be so easy for Elijah to just lay under that bush forever and just to keep praying that God would end his life. But God knows that what Elijah needs in that moment is to get up and get moving. But there's one other lesson that God has to teach Elijah in this moment. And that's that even though he gets up and he gets moving, he's also got to keep moving. Notice how the angel in the story comes back a second time to Elijah and once again says, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. And what I think is so important about this is that the angel doesn't abandon Elijah. Right? He knows that this is going to be hard for Elijah. God doesn't just walk away after saying, get up. God sticks with Elijah and keeps with him and tells him not only to get moving, but keep moving. Whatever you're struggling with in your life, I want you to know that God has not abandoned you. I know it might feel like that sometimes. I know you might wonder. I know you might feel like Elijah sometimes and just want to beg God to put an end to the failure and let the pain be over. But your story is not over, and God is not done with you. Jesus shows us that God's heart has always been for those in need, for the sick and the hurting. God will not abandon you. You've just got to keep moving. So if you feel like you're overwhelmed in your job, just keep moving. If you feel like your marriage, your relationship is hopeless, just keep moving. If you feel lonely and depressed, just keep moving. If you're in a financial disaster, just keep moving. If you're stuck in your sin, if you're unsure about God, just keep moving. And if you're at the end of your rope, if you feel like it's all just not worth it anymore, I beg you, just keep moving. Because here's the thing, God didn't abandon Elijah, and God's not going to abandon you. And what Jesus shows us is how the story ends. Jesus says, blessed are those who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's it for this week. I hope this has been helpful. If you don't mind, please take a moment and go down below and click that thumbs up if you like this video and if you think it'll be a blessing to others. And while you're down there, please take a moment to subscribe and share this video so that even more people can see it. Have a great week, and God bless.